Yes, I'm at Reggie's Garden, always picturesque, and it's quite pleasant here today, and I'm with
Eckart. I organise and coordinate Extinction Rebellion Jersey, and we have an open day here today to reactivate old members who have become a little quiet, and hopefully encourage new members to join us.
You have a membership, and obviously if people want to, like, they see your organisation, they hear about it, what does it involve for them if they join? What sort of commitment do they got? It's just...
The commitment can vary from an hour or two of voluntary work a week, joining one of our working groups,
Right.
Media and messaging, or outreach and training, or advocacy, or the actions group. It really depends on your time, how much time you have to give. All of us are volunteers in Jersey. I probably put in more than 20 hours a week, but that is fairly unusual. In terms of what can be done, yeah, those groups that I've mentioned all have their particular skill set to spread the word.
What's the central message? I mean, obviously we all know the environmental disaster which has already descended upon us, but as we sort of already previously said, it's a huge problem. What's the message of this group? What do your group want to do?
We have three demands, all directed at the government as well as society in general. Number one, tell the truth about the climate and ecological emergency. Tell the whole truth, because as you say, everybody is keenly aware of it, but nevertheless we don't know enough about it. That's the first demand. The second demand is to act now, to pass legislation in order to mitigate the likely climate collapse. And the third demand is to move beyond self-interested politics and set up binding citizens' assemblies. Now, on that note, the government of Jersey have, of course, decided to hold a citizens' assembly. It's been delayed because of COVID, but it is not binding. And also the remit of that citizens' assembly is, in our opinion, far too narrow. So the question that they will be addressing will simply be, how do we become carbon neutral in relation to Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions?
Of course, COVID is, in a sort of a sense, it's what every revolutionary dreamed of, isn't it, really? Because it's disrupted the world. The entire world is now in a state of not knowing what's going to happen. So if you want to change things, you couldn't ask for anything better than COVID. But,
well, that's a slightly provocative statement, but I can understand where you're coming from. But first of all, COVID and the pandemic, it is, the science hasn't had the final word on this, but it is very, very likely that it is to do, the virus came about or came into the human population because of ecological destruction. And the scientists are also saying that these will become more and more frequent the more deforestation takes place. So in that sense, we are living. COVID is the stark proof that the emergency is now. It's not something that is unimaginable 10, 20 years down the line. So in that sense, it was a huge wake-up call, but I always say, how many more wake-up calls do we need?
Well, the wake-up call, I remember when the Cuba Missile Crisis erupted, and I was in CND in the UK. And it was the best time ever for collecting money, because people desperately wanted to do something. They wanted to feel that they were participating. But of course they were having no influence whatsoever. The decisions were being made far away. And this is the hopelessness. The ordinary individual saying, well, what the hell can I do?
It can be very disheartening, but I would say that Extinction Rebellion is probably the most rational option that we have. It is and it's not for nothing that it's called the movement of movements. Within less than 2 years, it has hundreds of thousands of members internationally, and it has definitely changed the conversation dramatically, thanks to the 3 rebellions that have taken place, 2 in 2019 and the most recent in September this year.
Of course, Jersey's got a policy, supposedly. Obviously, everything is on standby because of COVID. It has got a policy on the climate change. They're supposed to be changing everything radically. There's not a lot of movement on that front. We're all doing exactly the same things as we were 6 months ago, as far as I can see. So,
well, I mean, we are in regular discussion with people in the Environment Department, and they actually invited us to talk to them about.
Well, I see you went to a scrutiny meeting, wasn't it? You went. I didn't know what it was. A closed scrutiny meeting with the Environment.
No, we had a state's briefing. No,
briefing was it?
But we are also in touch with the people who authored the carbon neutral strategy, right, and are behind the Citizens Assembly, and they know very well the shortcomings that we see in the strategy and in the Citizens Assembly. The main one, I think, is to do with the elephant in the room, and this is a very, very sensitive and difficult topic to address in Jersey, because the carbon neutral strategy is a strategy, yes, for carbon neutrality, but it is also a strategy to place Jersey ahead of the game as an international finance center. And therefore it says, and I quote, this strategy is to protect and develop our finance sector. And the finance sector itself, and the fact that there is no disclosure about fossil fuel investments by Jersey registered companies, is a great hypocrisy.
I was writing on this very theme this morning, because there's the External Relations Minister, they've just put a scrutiny report out on that. And obviously their main purpose is to maintain and develop the finance sector. Of course, they can't let go of it because they're tied to it, they're bound to it. And this is, as you say, we don't know what the finance industry is actually up to. We know it brings money in, but where that money comes from, what trees they're chopping down, we haven't got a clue, have we?
No, we don't. And there is, of course, I think business is moving in the right direction because of the severity of the crisis. But nevertheless, I think there is a long, long, long way to go before we can have an economic system that doesn't make the rich richer and the poor poorer.
But they don't want to let go of it, do they? And this is where the little COVID virus is doing a wonderful job if you don't get bitten by it, isn't it?
Yes, in a way, but I mean, the finance sector, as far as I know, I'm not in the finance sector, but it has not been as affected as other industries by the pandemic. But yeah.
I mean, I don't know how finance works. I don't know. I mean, there's businesses here by the 100. Their turnover, in theory, their capital, is far in excess of anything that Jersey's entire system has got. And they're just here. We don't know what they do. I mean, and they're all over the world. They're in 60 finance centres like Jersey.
Of course.
And there are more of them. So the wealth is there. And what the problem you're trying to solve, polluting the world, destroying the assets of the world, I mean, that should be so solvable, shouldn't it? With the wealth, the technical excellence which is available, but it's being used for the wrong purpose.
It's because it's based on self-interest. But I think a useful education in this regard and a raising of awareness is a book that was published in 2019, last year this time, by Nicholas Shaxson. Oh
yes, I interviewed him some years ago.
Called The Finance Curse. Right. And what we in Extinction Rebellion Jersey are in currently planning, together with Tax Justice Network, is to have a series of webinars run by TJN experts, including Nick Shaxson, in order to educate, first of all, Extinction Rebellion members, but the wider public as well, as to how the finance sector actually affects national economies, island economies like ours, and the whole spider's web, as it's called, with the City of London at its heart.
At a very basic level, I mean, I get into awful trouble. I go to the farming conference here every year. Now, it's quite obvious that people like farmers, on the one hand, they say we're protecting the environment, but we know damn well they're not. And if I stand up and say anything, oh, you're not doing much good for the environment in Jersey by what your practices, which we've developed over the years, that doesn't go down very well. And there's lots of people who are very environmentally concerned but work in the finance industry. And it's this sort of contradiction which is in everything. You're trying to get people to condemn their very livelihood. And this is so impossible, isn't it?
It is very, very difficult. Because we are all complicit in the system. To such a degree that it feels often that it is hopeless. But I think the thing to do is to acknowledge the complicity and say, nevertheless, I can do X, Y, or Z.
I must say I'm a bit in despair at the moment with the idea that voting for people has any purpose. But there was an interesting election, as we've seen in Guernsey this week, where they've changed their system very radically. Have you followed it?
I haven't had the time this week because I've been preparing for this open day.
Right, they've been opened up their electoral system, so there's no constituencies, there's no parish, it's an all-island vote. And it was quite interesting to see that we thought, well, the voting sheet was going to be 119 candidates, it would be much too big. But people participated. They had, for Guernsey, quite a high level of interest, quite a lot of number of people voted. But are you in touch with people of like mind in Guernsey? Is it a Channel Island movement, or is it just a Jersey movement that you're involved in?
That's a good question. We're, again, as part of broadening contacts and networks in so-called finance centres, we are wanting, for later this year, we've started making contact with Extinction Rebellion Guernsey and also Extinction Rebellion Isle of Man. Because what we would like to do is to have a small network to begin with of the Crown dependencies, so that we can coordinate and learn from each other. In the longer term, we're hoping that we can extend that kind of network to other finance centres, particularly British overseas territories like the Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, and so on and so forth. Because
they're all in a similar situation, because very few of these places make anything, do they?
Yes.
So they haven't got a local industry which is actually creating their own wealth. They're relying on this finance wealth.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it will cease, but if you wouldn't need to grab one of these big organisations which are involved in finance to finance you, like the oil companies we hear are changing their mind. They're coming out, they're turning over a good leaf, and they're saying all sorts of things. I don't suppose they mean it, but they're going to become environmentally friendly, if that's still the expression that's used. Now, if there is a company which is seriously involved, they could finance everything you want and more, couldn't they?
If there is such a company out there, yeah, go for it.
Does this government here, as far as you know, expressed any interest in financing or assisting groups like you?
Nope.
They're not. How do they see, with the project they've got on, what do they see themselves putting in money into in order to get people aware? I mean, if people aren't aware now, with all the publicity that's been on the television for years and years and years, if people aren't aware now, I don't know what this government could do, but they ought to be doing something, didn't they?
There is a lot of talk in the carbon neutral strategy and the report that the initial report that preceded it about citizen involvement, because we all know that in terms of civic engagement, Jersey is probably bottom of the league table in the OECD. But in terms of community involvement, it's a different matter. So there is something to build on. But nevertheless, I'm always amused when I see the COVID banners where we are assured that we have the power but to control the virus. But I think when it comes to political power, I don't even think that the politicians necessarily have much power because they are dependent on the finance sector.
Absolutely. Well, on that happy note, I think we will conclude.
Thank you very much.
I'm most grateful for your time.
Thank you.